I've spent the last couple of days playing with Consul and standing up a Vagrant cluster. So, for those of you that don't know, Consul is a distributed service discovery client structure thing.
You can edit.
Yeah, I can edit this afterwards. I won't because I'm too lazy, but you know. So it's dead simple to get going. You have an agent which runs on each box, and the agent basically operates in either server mode or client mode. So
am I right in thinking there are agents for both Windows and Linux? Yeah.
Windows, Linux, and Mac.
Yeah. Ooh.
Should you so wish? Should you wish to, you know, create more problems for yourself by running your server infrastructure on Mac? Yeah. So the agent will run just as a little daemon in the background. The idea behind the structure is that you'll have 3 or more server nodes whose only job is to basically allow you to achieve consensus during an election and provide a kind of connection point for other nodes. So the 3 server nodes operate independently, basically. When an agent node starts up, you tell it, okay, here's a set of server nodes, join this cluster, and from there it can then discover all the other nodes in the cluster. Consul's quite good insofar as if the server nodes go down or the agent can't communicate, the agents can still communicate with each other via a gossip protocol, and they still disseminate updates about services and all that sort of thing. So it's designed to be incredibly failure tolerant. So the server nodes basically just have one check on them, which says, yeah, the agent is alive and reachable. Oh, why have they died? Okay. These are the agent nodes, so I just span up our location API on the nodes. So they have 2 checks on them. One is the surf health status. So surf is obviously the product underneath that Consul uses. So it has a health check on there by default. And also, I've added a service check for location API, which at the moment is literally just curling an endpoint. So it just curls LB status. So our API, if it's on, if the LB status is on, then it returns you a 200. If it's off, it returns you a 503. So curl will return a non-zero exit code if it encounters a 503. So Consul interprets that as a service failure.
So do you configure it to say what the health check is?
Yep. So I don't think there's anything else really I need to show you in the UI. The UI is quite friendly.
Sorry, what's the aim of the health checks?
What's the difference between the 2?
So the aim of this is a service check which says this service is available on this box, and you can do a health check as well. So a health check might be the memory usage on the box, for example. So it's kind of like an Agios check where it just gives you an overview of how the node's doing, a host check, yeah. So the service check here is orange, which means it's failing, probably because the node lost connectivity when I took the Wi-Fi off. But you can see the surf health status check still says, yeah, I'm okay. So the service won't be broadcast from this node, but the actual node itself is still running, which means you can have multiple services. If there are multiple services running on a single node, they can fade in and out as and when. So okay, I'll jump into the Puppet code now. That might be slightly more interesting for you. Screen share. This one.
So sorry, so the location service basically her node is alive or dead, and that status is controlled by polling an endpoint or something like that?
Yeah, so I'll show you. It'll become clear when I show you the syntax of the check.
Andy, it might be worth just quickly, if this video is being spread around, going into what a service actually is in the Consul definition.
Oh, well, Consul's own definition of a service is really loose. It's anything which can be looked up by DNS, basically. I'll cover the DNS lookup, but it's basically anything that's running on the box that should be externally accessible. So, sorry, let me just go back. So this is the definition, service definition for our location service. So you can add tags for like specific nodes. So if you have a master-slave configuration or something like that, you can tag some nodes as master and some nodes as slave, and vice versa. When you're looking it up, you can say only give me master nodes or only give me slave nodes, etc. But for now, we're not using that. So you specify the port that it's running on and the check script. So you can point to any kind of bash executable script, so a Python script or a bash shell script or anything, or you can just execute a command directly in there. So because it's nice and simple, I'm just saying curl that endpoint, localhost 80, and the check interval. And that's it.
So this is configuring each machine, and this basically goes to the agent on each machine.
Yeah, so this is saying all of the, so if I show you the location API, yeah. So if I show you, this is our location API Puppet role. So any machine that has the Puppet, the location API role, should also include that check, so they get that check exported. And the agent will then know I need to check this service, and if it's alive, I can broadcast the fact that this service is alive on this node. Easy peasy. So yeah, you can register service checks, and you can also register just health checks. So here's one that I was in the middle of writing but didn't get finished. That basically just says I want to have a visual indicator of whether or not the Consul UI, web UI, is running properly. So again, you can just run a curl against it, and it will come up with orange or green depending on whether it's alive or dead. So all the it was literally just to illustrate the health checks. So this won't broadcast a service because the Consul web UI isn't necessarily a service, but it's a health check that you want to run on the node to say is this node healthy.
Does that communicate with the server then to say what the health checks are for each node?
Yeah. So everything is distributed everywhere. So these nodes, so these client nodes 5 and 6 know about all of these server nodes, and they know about each other, and they also know about the status of the services underneath.
Okay.
Do the health checks affect I don't know, the service broadcast, looking at the service?
So the service check will affect whether or not the service is available from that box. The health checks don't.
Yeah. I'm wondering what the health checks really are.
It's literally just being able to look at a node and say, are you healthy? Because the service might be up, but if memory utilization is very high, you want to look at it. It's trying to kind of create a dashboard where you can look at this nodes view and say, only show me failing ones, or you can look at this service view. So you can go by service, or you can go.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't do alerting. It just does visual inspection.
And I guess you're going to get to how the app communicates with other services.
Yeah. Okay. So. I don't think there's anything else in the Puppet code really. I mean, I'm using a third-party module to wrap Consul, which
it seems like the biggest benefit here is that actually rolling out of this is much more simplified because it's just an agent on each box.
Yeah, the agent is it's a Go application. The agent is written in Go, which means it's well, it has no runtime dependencies. So it'll literally run anywhere, and it doesn't really care. The agent proxies DNS and RPC on the local machine. So there are a couple of ways that you can do a lookup when you want to look up a service. So I was going to try and illustrate this, but I will in a minute. So you can look up a service by either running a DNS query against either the set of servers that you know are your Consul servers, or you can look up against the local agent. So the local agent will know about all the services, and it'll know who's alive and who's dead, and it'll just give you one back.
It seems like the local agent is the safest one to do in case the servers are down.
Well, most likely it's going to be a question of speed, because if you're looking up against the local DNS, then it's going to be quite fast. Whereas if you're having to wait for an extra hop, it's going to be especially bad in the case of a miss, for example, because you'd have to go to Consul first and then come back.
Does the Consul DNS actually just work as part of the standard DNS of the box at that point?
You have to do some setup. So there's basically you have to tell the DNS settings. Look, there's an extra search domain here. So all the Consul services are registered on service name dot service dot Consul. So in the case of location, it would be location.service.consul.
Yeah. But presumably once that's set up on the box, the actual apps themselves then don't need to have any awareness of Consul whatsoever, do they?
Yeah, this is precisely it. So if I just... So if I just ping location.services.consul,
In the pop-up role,
services, I've forgotten that.
you can change how often it communicates.
I had this working and now it's broken, but
What was it? What was the broadcast?
Can I pause broadcast? I can only stop. It doesn't matter. But yeah, once you've got the DNS set up, basically you can tell the DNS settings on the box that there's a local proxy, which is the Consul agent, and you can tell it to search there first.
Is that because your location service is down?
It's entirely possible, actually.
The restaurant was open.
Sorry?
Did you have another service up?
No, I had 2 instances of the location API. I'm not going to bother trying to fix this on the fly because it's not going to be particularly useful. But yeah, so the DNS gets its information from Consul, and will just serve you an instance of that service. It is data center aware, so you can append to this search string. You can append the name of your data center. For now, the config I've got in that example is just using a single data center. But if your service wants to be data center aware, then it can just append the data center name into that DNS name.
How does it know the data center?
So you configure it. So if I can HTTP, that's the Consul configuration. So the data center at the moment is just unknown, which is just a facet of the fact, and I just didn't bother to change it. But the nodes are grouped by data center. So you'll have noticed in the UI there was a drop down on the top corner. So you basically browse by data center. The idea is that you run at least 3 server nodes in each data center, so that in the event of network partition, they can still achieve consensus. And the data center clusters are intended to operate in the event of partition. And then when it comes back, they'll basically re-elect themselves, not re-elect, reorganize themselves and work out what's up and what's down. Anything else? Any questions?
Yeah. So the so actually within the app, have you any example of how, if we're calling reviews API, how would we actually interact with that? So would we call local DNS each time, or?
So you've got two options. You can either use a DNS library in your app to say, query this DNS server and get me an instance of, get me the response. And then from that you can use that to make the call. Or you can just query local DNS as you would in a normal HTTP call, for example. So the minimal configuration that you need to do in your app is change the endpoint that you're calling. So instead of calling reviews.otms.com, you'd call reviews.services.consul.
Okay.
And it'd go, here you go. So it's minimally invasive.
Exactly. So rolling this out, you still get a win because everything would, if it was in the base role of everything would announce. So the benefit would be that all the consumers they would have to change their code, but they wouldn't have to wait for everybody to start implementing the announce. Is that correct? And
you've got the other side of that is.
I just thought I'd come in because I fuck over.
Right,
Steve?
The other side of that is that consumers can start using the DNS names without having the agent on the box. So if you reconfigure that, if you don't want the agent running on the box, or you haven't rolled it out to that box yet, you can just reset the DNS config on that box to point to, for example, the server cluster, and search there. So it means that you can, with only DNS config, you can get the consumption up and running.
Sure. Okie doke.
Any issues like with caching DNS and stuff? Does it like a node goes down and it's unhealthy?
Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, the time to live on the DNS records is essentially
it's 0. I was just looking at that page.
Yeah. It's basically limited by the health check. So if you specify a check interval of 10 seconds, it'll be the time to live on the DNS if you have it. The setting might be 0, but the effective time to live will be 10 seconds plus however long it takes to disseminate.
You'd probably actually want to up the TTL to be the health check interval.
That has other effects across the company, though, Steve. So if you change the TTL just whole scale, then you could have problems when it comes to some of the ops side of things. So especially when it comes to OTM addresses. So the TTL is actually set quite low at the minute. I think it's set to a minute or 15 minutes. I can't remember.
But presumably the console I/O is effectively its own DNS server, so couldn't its TTL be different?
Console, the TTL is 0.
Yeah.
Any DNS query will hit the console server.
Yeah, which we don't want inside the company.
Well, the point is that if you're using the local agent to proxy the DNS, then it doesn't matter that it's a 0 TTL. Can hit every time. It's only local, so it's a tiny overhead. Like Stacko said, if you start upping the TTL, then you will increase the time it takes for services to fade in and out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which is bad. It can be bad, should I say?
It can be bad. It's a question of tuning.
Performance-wise, it's all been
it's a net query.
Doesn't say local query, but that will have to go to the back-end store, right? The local query we do.
Yeah. You can mess about with the queries locally, and you see that, you're looking sub 1 millisecond. So
that can add up, though, can it not? I mean, doing thousands of queries a second.
Yeah, if you're doing thousands of DNS queries, but then that'd be true of...
How many of our systems do thousands of DNS queries?
I don't know.
We have a very simple environment. We've got maybe 20 services. We're talking at maximum 200 or 300 requests every time. It's not really unusual.
Yeah. And even then, you can set the TTL to 1 second.
Yeah, to alleviate that.
Yeah,
Okay.
1 second and then.
But you're right. You're very much right. It's something we should think of and keep in the top of our minds for the future, because as
Yeah.
more and more services get added, and the environment for personalization and stuff makes it a little bit more complex, than we think about fine tuning.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the fact that it's going to the server, the back-end store every time. You know, that's about 7 millisecond most of the time. But no, it's only good to think about on that side.
Because I think the delays that could happen is doing the actual service check, and then when the service check reports to the server, it reports to the master, and then you are reading from slaves.
Yeah.
So there is some consistency
So
to
it's
be aware of.
but it's eventual.
You can tweak it.
Yeah, you can tweak it,
You
and
can only query the master, then you have the actual
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
There
you
could be
can
some
tell it.
delay there. And then the DNS caching, if you have a TTL, will affect that. So
I think there's some tweaking you can do around consensus.
Yeah.
And one thing, so if we've got multiple boxes serving a service and the client makes a call to that service, do we know how, does it round robin between the calls, or do we know how it spreads the load?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
It uses gossip-based protocol under the hood, so it's specifically set to not round robin. So it uses a combination of methods like closest and fastest response and shit like that. So
Is that something you can change?
No. So the whole thing about Consul is it's gossip-based protocol, and that's what makes it much more efficient than another than off-the-shelf or custom-built DNS or service delivery system. Just because the constant chatter in the environment is something we should think about as well, because of increasing concerns around bandwidth. But I think we'll be okay. I think we should deal with it.
So sorry, you said it's nearest or
There's a whole their gossip-based protocol is nearest, fastest responding, non-busy. There's a whole list of.
it doesn't sound like it's something to worry about. Though.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's something that there's places that use Consul that have now got thousands and thousands of Windows servers, and they seem to be okay. Windows are the most difficult thing.
That was going to be my next question. Have you read anything about when they're expecting a kind of V1 and like how stable is it? Are people using this in?
This is being used in lots of places in production, lots of places. They're not going to V1 until next year.
Yeah.
Next year. Because Terraform is a big use for them, a use case for them now that they have to get working. They just released Consul 0.4 last week.
0.4. It was a bit more than that because I've been using 0.4 for.
So I know
so
it's only been in the past couple of weeks, but it's not been long. But I can't see them having a V1 for at least another 6 to 9 months.
To be honest, what I've seen is very full featured, and it seems to be pretty stable.
And it's not like it's all or nothing, because I mean, we could try it out just by getting up and running and then switching the DNS entries on, well, switching the host entries on a couple of boxes.
Quite.
So it's not like we have to go this and we can't go back. Switching it off again would be relatively straightforward if it was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it looks simple and all sorts of win.
Yeah, it does to me.
Yeah, it's a.
And switching environments like QA and prod is just literally pointing to, like, have your local agent or whatever point to.
Well, that's it,
regular
because
service.
the queries would still be exactly the
Does that make
same.
sense?
It's the agent that takes care of all that configuration for you, which is the beauty of it. It just takes away the management of all the shit. It's quite telling that Andy was able to come up with a proof of concept with Consul in 2 days, and we're now 6 months into a Java service discovery project that doesn't work.
Mm.
We should talk.
and if someone doesn't want to use the DNS, they can still use HTTP API directly, no?
Yeah, yeah. So if they don't want to change their DNS on the box, they can just query the HTTP API and say, get me a service record for this, and it'll bring them back.
So on my local machine, if I wanted to get a pre-prod, call a pre-prod service,
Yeah.
how would I do it?
There's a HTTP API that runs as part of the agent. So you could query one of the server nodes.
Just give me an IP address.
And just- Basically, it gives you it's a HTTP API on the DNS, essentially.
It's across the top of server and children.
Yeah.
So I think I've missed. So different environments. Is it an environment aware? Like, does each node know that it's a pre-prod?
A different environment would be like a different data center.
Okay.
So pre-prod would be a data center.
Sure.
So you could have or a TAM, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Depending on how you want to configure it.
Well, it literally is a different data center, isn't it? So, I see. Okay, cool.
Presumably, if we're doing this, we'd probably want to set up the DNS proxies on developers' boxes as well, because otherwise it's going to be a bit of a pain.
You shouldn't do that, because not everybody's developer boxes are managed. Some are on the domain, some are not on the domain.
Got you.
So
as a developer, how do I access pre-prod?
why would you want to?
Well, if I'm running my code locally and it's calling some services, how is that going to work?
How do you do it right now?
Well, at the moment, it's either it depends upon the box, but it's either just a raw DNS request, so that they've just got the DNS address of the services.
So,
Yeah.
Like, you add it to your results, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You add the different DNS servers.
Yeah.
Is that not what you just said, Steve?
Pardon, I couldn't hear everyone talked at once.
You add the DNS servers for the Consul cluster that you care about. So I guess there will be a cluster for pre-prod, a cluster for something, and then you add the DNS IP addresses to your, I forgot the name, resort.com.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of with thinking
So
of
there's
Steve.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I effectively use one of the console boxes as a primary DNS server. So yeah, that works.
Yeah.
There's a problem with that. One, you've got some fucking idiots using Windows in our company, so they can't manage it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Use Linux.
Of course, the other way of doing it is to just say, well, the old DNS names will still work as well, and you just use those locally.
I think that's exactly what will happen.
But if you do it, you can do it.
You can use it. If people can't fucking use that how you work a Mac, do you really expect them to be able to add Mac servers on the machine?
Yeah.
Then, I mean,
They press F5 to fuck up their application. Exactly.
But
We're talking about developers, no?
Yeah, we are.
but it means you've then got to retain all the old OTM domains.
Which is, I think that's much further above our conversation. It's a much further level above our conversation. That's an operational.
Those F5s will go kicking and screaming.
F5 will still be around this time next year.
Oh yeah.
That would be an operational matter.
That would-
Cool. So what does the like the Java one have that this doesn't?
Nobody knows because it doesn't fucking
It's not
work.
broadcast.
Yeah. Much higher memory requirements and more batteries.